Senator Hasegawa, if you'd like to speak to your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really want to express gratitude to you for scheduling it for a hearing and hopefully for exec. I also want to thank Clint McCarthy, who's just done yeoman's work over the years in helping to get to this point and perfect the bill. To answer Senator Fortunato's question, the treasurer in the contract they negotiate with whoever is our service provider includes a per transaction fee, which, per transaction, considering the amount of transactions we do, is pretty small. But it's not really clear because it's credited against whatever interest we might otherwise be earning on that money. So it's kind of a net, and you'd have to dig into the treasurer's annual report to get that precise figure if it even exists. So anyway, I hope you'll give me some latitude, Madam Chair, because this is one of those things that it takes a little while to wrap your head around. But once you wrap your head around it, a light bulb goes off and say, wow, that's like a no-brainer. How come we aren't doing that already? And I've given presentations all around the state and actually the country as well, trying to just sort of spread the message that there's a better way to use public dollars for public purposes. So what if I could tell you that we could lower banking costs, drastically increase financing capacity for infrastructure, create jobs, raise new revenue, all without raising taxes? Now that seems like it's almost too good to be true, but that's exactly what owning our own bank could do for the state of Washington. So we're in a huge fiscal crisis right now. That's no secret to anybody. But let me give you an example. On top of our fiscal crisis, we still have to build stuff. So sitting on the books right now in Ways and Means is a $5 billion bond bill. Okay, so let's do a little bit of the math on that. So $5 billion, and the going rate, the average rate that I found online for municipal bonds was about 4.6% right now. So let's just say, for rounding purposes, 5%. We sell a bond, 5%. Over 20 years, that math works out to $5 billion for a $5 billion bond. So that means we're paying $10 billion over 20 years for the use of $5 billion now, which if you need $5 billion in emergency right now, you got to do what you got to do. But that's become our public financing strategy. So you sell bond this year, and then we finance another bond. It's like getting a mortgage, and what family can afford piling 20 mortgages on top of each other? So our debt capacity is limited by the Constitution. We can't bond more than, and we passed a bill to lower our debt capacity over the years, which is not a bad thing, actually. So we've been bouncing off our debt ceiling for quite some time. So the infrastructure that we have out there right now is probably as good as it's ever going to get because we don't have debt capacity to improve on our infrastructure, let alone maintain the potholes and everything. We're selling bonds to do all that, which is costing obviously twice as much as for the use of the money right now. If we were to do, say, a 30-year bond at that same 5%, that would be $7.5 billion in interest paid off of $5 billion. So it would cost us $12.5 billion over 30 years for that use of $5 billion today. So this shows what the power of owning our own bank can do, because right now, when we collect all of our tax dollars, like anybody, we have to have a bank account, something to process the dollars. So our bank account right now is at US Bank, but it rotates. So the prior contract was with, I think, Bank of America, and the contract before that was with Wells Fargo. But the interesting thing is, there's only ever one bidder for a contract. You wonder what's going on there. I mean, has public finance been actually like carved up and assigned to the different Wall Street banks? I don't know. But the fact that there is only ever one bidder offers little choice on how we want to, or, what price we're willing to accept for our banking services. So if we instead create our own bank and nothing else changes, we just, instead of the treasurer depositing tax revenue at U.S. Bank, deposits it at our bank. Everything else remains the same. But then the legislature can say, we want to leverage our money because it's the tax revenue that flows through it that gives leveraging capacity. It's called fractional reserve lending. That's a standard banking practice that says you can safely leverage your capital up to 10 times. So in other words, if we capitalized a bank with $500 million, we're probably going to put that much money into the housing trust fund anyway, or with the public works assistance account, we'll be putting hundreds of millions of dollars in investments because we can't afford to fall too far behind. But $500 million, if it has the cash flow from our tax revenue, can leverage safely up to $5 billion. Now that kind of is the same price as our bond that we're going to sell, except we don't have to pay interest on it. We charge ourselves whatever interest we want to charge ourselves. We can charge, the fact that you charge 2% interest on, say, $500 million, but you're getting that 2% 10 times. So that's 20%. So if you look at the Bank of North Dakota, and we know the model works because there's working models out there. The Bank of North Dakota is a living model, proof that it works. They're averaging every year record profits, and that profit is for the people of the state of North Dakota. So their ROI, if you look at their annual reports, are bouncing between 18 and 20%. Now, our state investment board that's investing all of our pension funds, which is one of the best in the country, and I won't dispute that, and I thank them for doing the great job that they do, but they're getting between 7 and 9%, 10% at the very most, but that's offset with down years too. Bank of North Dakota, even during the middle of the Great Recession, was still making record profits because it's not leveraging out into investments and all that. It's actually investing in the people of North Dakota, investing in their infrastructure, investing in things that the people of the state need. So it's one of those things where you think, gosh, how come we're not already doing it? And, I thought there was insidious forces out there that are working behind the curtain to prevent this from happening, but I've come to conclude that the most insidious force out there is institutional inertia. We're just too afraid to step out and actually do something that makes common sense because we're not used to it. The rest of the world uses public banking as a strategy to finance public goods. In the United States, we're more an anomaly than the norm. We use private commercial banks for public financing as opposed to public banks for public financing, which is why we're falling behind the rest of the world. I mean, you look at China, for instance, they've financed 15,000 miles of high-speed rail. They built it in 10 years. How do you afford to do something like that? I mean, that's on top of all of the other initiatives that they've got going, the green energy and whatnot. I mean, electric vehicle construction. I think a public bank for the state of Washington, or for any state for that matter, is inevitable because we just can't keep going the way we're going and hope to remain competitive globally, let alone in the state of Washington, in the United States. So because it's a proven model, because it really has no downside that I could see to it, except that it's something new and we're not used to it. So, Lao Tzu said, journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. We just have to not be afraid to take that first step, and we'll figure it out. The United States used to be a country, a can-do country. We see something that makes sense, let's do it, let's get it done. It feels more like we're too afraid to do anything anymore. And that's the real sadness that I feel for our children, because we're creating a debt-ridden society that they're going to have to dig their way out of. And public banking is really the solution. It's the only way that we can finance sufficient housing construction to meet the imbalance in the need for more housing. We rely on developers to develop sufficient amounts of housing by incentivizing them with tax breaks and whatnot. That's a double loser. We're losing revenue in the taxes, and they're also not going to build enough housing because it's not in their financial interest to. A shortage of supply increases the value of the stock that they're building. So we're never going to meet our housing capacity needs under our current paradigm. But the only way that we can finance that is through a public bank. So I see it as inevitable and necessary if we're going to turn the direction around in our global competitiveness and just our standard of living here, maintaining it here in Washington State. So thank you so much for hearing this bill. And I know people must have a lot of questions. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about it. So I make myself available to you right now. Please ask me any questions you want to hear.